This is Brent, Allan Winters, CommonLawyer.com, Part 17, this is, of a series concerning the applicability of our Declaration of 76, clause by clause and blow by blow, to our present circumstances here in the United States today. We are in that section of the Declaration, that is, paragraphs 3 through 9, wherein those signing the Declaration accuse King George III, who claimed to be emperor, not king, but emperor of the colonies in North America and the rest of his empire, while being king, that is, of a limited power and authority in England. They accuse him of trying to do away with local laws, and that means all local authority. First, it says in paragraph 3, he refused to assent to laws that are good for the public. Paragraph 4, he has forbidden governors to pass laws of importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent is given, but he never gives his assent, he just neglects them. 5, it says he refuses to pass other laws for the accommodations of large districts of people, and we talked there about how he wouldn't allow people into uninhabited land in the Piedmont area of the Alleghenies at that time. He wouldn't let them migrate into those places unless they relinquished their right of representation locally and even in Parliament, of course. And he's accused at that point in paragraph 5 of being a tyrant. And we had defined a tyrant as a person who claims and uses all three powers of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. He makes law. He enforces the law he makes, and he sets in judgment in particular cases on the interpretation of that law. That is the very definition of a tyrant, and we talked about earlier, tyrant is a word that arises from the ancient Anglo-Saxon god Tu, spelled T-U-E-T-O-O variously. Frankly, they didn't have much writing back in those days. They just pronounced the name. And our day of the week, Tuesday, is named after the Nordic god Tu, and from that person named Tu, that demon god, arises the word tyrant, and it means the person who gathers all three powers of government in himself. Now we come to paragraph 6, which says as follows. He, that is King George III, has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. This is a common ploy of governments to wear down anyone who would oppose them. That is, to fatigue men into complying with their wishes, because to resist costs far and away more in time and money than to litigate, or otherwise convene a legislative body to deal with the problem, as is spoken of here. Notice the words he uses. He has called together legislative bodies at places, number 1, unusual, number 2, uncomfortable, number 3, distant from the depository of their public records. Why? For the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with what he wants. Again, we come to the principle that government, to be limited, must be local. Let me repeat that. Government, to be limited, must be local. Bottom line, as much as possible, people must keep their legislatures and also their courts close and accessible. Keeping in mind, however, that closeness, though better enabling accessibility, never ensures accessibility, because technology has devised other ways to make courts and legislative bodies inaccessible, even when right near your own back door. Without question, distant legislatures and legislators and distant courts are inaccessible. But even if these are nearby, they may still be inaccessible. For example, in undue fear of terrorist, hypersecurity at American courthouses has made those courthouses, presently as we speak, inaccessible. Indeed, anyone that's tried to enter a courthouse lately, especially a federal courthouse, will discover that it's not worth the hassle. At the least, one risks being arrested for some crime that could be trumped up against him just for good measure, that is, for no reason, to set an example, or to make others leery of even coming near the courthouse because they don't want to be hassled there. And at worst, someone could get hurt. Tensions run high. And those that work in courthouses are persuaded by the hype that is pumped out to them through the government from whom they receive their paychecks, that there is some kind of a war on against terror. Well, that's as ludicrous as declaring war on ants, or declaring war on trees, or declaring war on automobiles, or declaring war on rocks. It is utterly silly to even speak of warring against things that have no moral responsibility to do right or wrong, as though you're holding that thing responsible and are going to punish it or stop it. No, war is on men, and that's the only war that's legitimate. But the war on terror has made our courthouses and our legislative buildings, our government buildings, inaccessible. And when they become inaccessible, what goes on inside of them becomes more secret. And when government becomes secret, as the secret mystery religion governments of Babylon, that's what it is, then freedom begins to fail. When a central distant power hinders local government, and that's what will happen when government buildings become inaccessible, the people must establish and conduct local courts using the jury. And by setting up smaller common law courts at more local levels, America will have that which William Blackstone cites as the peculiar strength of the early Anglo-Saxons. Jurors as judges, impaneled at every level and locality, from the manor courts of the village neighborhoods and the 100 courts of the countrysides, to the shire motes, that is, the county courts, and the royal courts, which would be analogous to our federal courts. By these, says Blackstone, courts were handy close by every cottage in England. That was true in Anglo-Saxon England. Case in point in all of this is the establishment of what in America was called the Indian Territory, now called Oklahoma. When our federal government, our general government out of Washington, D.C., first laid out what was called the Indian Territory, it refused to pass laws for the accommodation of large districts of people and attempted to govern it from Washington, D.C. This is the very thing that our Declaration complains of. Well, the results in Oklahoma provide two examples of the trouble that distant rule brings. First, because Congress had overlooked a strip of land about 170 miles long and 35 miles wide, which is today's Oklahoma Panhandle, they failed to include it in any territory or state, and no government enforced any law within that panhandle territory. Consequently, cutthroats gathered from around the world and infested then nearby territories. Second, until Oklahoma statehood in 1907, the organized Indian Territory was also an outlaw's lair, just like the panhandle, and the distant and faraway federal government, proving unable to bring peace to that area, crime became rampant. It was exceedingly dangerous to everyone in that area to live or for anyone to pass through. In fact, no amount of force from the federal government ever assuaged the lawlessness that occurred there. Between 1875 and 1907, the federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, having criminal jurisdiction over white men in the Indian Territory, sentenced over 160 men to hang, but with little or no effect. By the way, half of these did hang. The other half, because of appeals and other troubles, served short sentences, longer sentences, or life imprisonment. However, upon achieving statehood in 1907, and by the way, that included by that time the panhandle of what is now Oklahoma, with its county courts and local sheriffs, right away peace emerged and began to grow. Local county government has always been our common law strength from the Anglo-Danes to the Americans. And true common law government, says Blackstone, being intolerant of distant decree, brings its courts and legislative assemblies close and accessible to each person. Are the principles of our Declaration of 76 applicable today? Most assuredly, and here's a good example. As power migrates more and more and more, it migrates in America up level to level, till now it resides in Washington, D.C., from whence distant decrees are made, and with such decrees all men uniformly are to comply whether the decree is applicable or whether it is not. Federal control of our police forces, Now we have the president claiming the power and the right to murder any American he wishes to murder. Drones fill the sky, spying on everyone. The posse comitatus law has been repealed, de facto, if not in law, claiming that presidents can now use federal troops, army, regular army, to invade and do anything he wishes to do. And that has been building for a long time, even since the time of President Eisenhower, when he used the acts called the Enforcement Acts to send federal troops to federalize the National Guard, send them into Arkansas. Recently, police forces were used in some areas of the South, and regular military troops to disarm citizens during Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath. All of like exertions of force from a distant ruler, a distant power, are indicative of a people that are losing fast their freedoms. What is the remedy? To be minded locally. And today, Americans must impanel the jury. They must impanel it everywhere they can. They must start in their church assemblies, in their townships, in their local villages, in their cities, in their water districts, in their irrigation districts. They must impanel the jury, and they must give the power of discernment to the jury, not as a majority institution, but as an all-or-nothing institution to come to a conclusion. In order to keep courts accessible, charters of such smaller local government must empower the impaneling of the jury, according to the course, by the way, of the common law, including appointments of local bailiffs in the villages, irrigation districts, townships, and churches, with duties akin to the justices of the peace to oversee fair play in the impaneling of the jury. And these administrative positions, to oversee the fair impaneling of the jury just minutes before the decision is to be made, must be by officials elected locally that can be gotten rid of if they don't do right. This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, and this is part 17 of a series concerning the applicability of our Declaration of 76 to our circumstances here and now. And as I end, I drop this footnote. The impaneling of the jury is set forth in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and if any think that our Bible is not supportive of the common law jury, they need to contemplate that passage. Or go to commonlawyer.com and purchase the book concerning the jury, wherein is expounded that passage and other things of our common law concerning the jury.